right. Hey, everybody, this is Jason Wilson with Isn't Life Curious? And today we're continuing our mini series about the science of psychedelics in Serious About Psychedelics. And today I'm really excited to be joined by the founder of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. I'm here with Dr. Rick Doblin. Rick, thanks so much for being willing to come on the podcast today.
I am happy to do it. It's really good to speak with you.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks so much. And I know we've got a lot to pack in a limited amount of time here, so I'm just going to jump straight in. And one of the first things I wanted to get into is just to ask you, well, first of all, congratulations on the phase 3 MDMA clinical trial. That's awesome news to see come out, and especially the publicity to see that on the front page of the New York Times and, all these sort of things. That's quite an achievement. So congratulations to you and MAPS and everybody that's been involved in that. That was really amazing to see.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the Nature Medicine published our paper about our first phase 3 studies, but I was joking with our staff that we have to stop with all this publicity because it's getting expensive for me, because the first New York Times article was so good, I went to the frame store to get it framed and it was $300. And then a week later, there's another one, another $300. So
absolutely. Yeah. And my wife used to work in a framing department, so I'm well aware of those costs. Yes, they can stack up.
They sure can. Yeah. It seems simple, put it in a frame, but
right. Yeah. How did this turn into a multi-$1,000 operation?
Yeah.
And one of the first things I wanted to jump in here is what actually, going, kind of way back, what sparked your interest in psychedelics that has led to, the foundation of MAPS and this dedication to trying to promote formal research and make these compounds, available therapeutically? What sparked that journey for you?
Well, political. It was political interests, and I'd say, I'm 67. I went to college in 1971 when I was 17 years old. So I was a bit young for a lot of the 60s to participate more directly, but I was very involved in politics and reading and things like that. And I believed the propaganda about LSD. You take it a few times, you're certifiably insane, you're damaging your chromosomes, you're likely to have a psychotic break. You could jump out of a window. I didn't know any better. I just believed all this stuff. I thought that the Beatles, when they first came out, I Want to Hold Your Hand and all this kind of stuff, I thought, I just not too long before that had been through as a young boy the Cuban Missile Crisis and the whole idea that we should duck and cover under our desk if there's going to be a nuclear war. And I just thought, the Beatles, this is ridiculous. Silly love songs while there's the world's at risk. So I was kind of a serious guy. And I just was raised to pay attention to what I would call deeper threats. Mm-hmm. I'm Jewish and was taught about the Holocaust from an early age and just thought how horrendous that was. And then, as I mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis, now the whole world could go up. And then Vietnam, I was in... one of the last years of the lottery. So I just was of this feeling that it's just this crazy world. And how could I respond? I was interested in learning about the other, and so in high school, I went to a pretty large high school, New Trier, outside of Chicago in Winnetka, and they had Russian. So I took Russian class.
Oh, cool.
To try to learn about the Russians. And I went to Russia, actually, the summer of 1970. My parents sent me with about 60 other high school students to study Russian. And that kind of really was a very eye-opening trip for me, because my parents had also gave me some prayer books to bring to the guys at the synagogue because those were illegal. So my parents actually sent me on this underground adventure in my luggage, which wasn't that big. I had a bunch of these prayer books, and we made all this money, me and a couple of the guys with me, selling our symbols of America to the Russian young kids, black market kids. We made thousands and thousands of rubles, which were worthless outside of Russia because they didn't want anybody to escape. And the reason I say this is just that I was very politically inclined. And when I was in Russia, I was just amazed, like, these people don't all want to kill me. It just felt like these are, governments that are battling, but they don't represent the people. And that was something that was eye-opening for me. I thought, we're against all the Russians, and all the Russians are bad, and they're all part of this system, but they're being oppressed as well by their government. So that was an eye-opener. Also, I did meet these guys at the synagogue, and I said, I got some books for you. And they said, we're being observed. Let's meet at a subway station at a certain time, certain place. I also had all this money to give them, these rubles. So I did that, and that was exciting. But then when I got back, this guy in my Russian class gave me a book to read, and I loved it. And I gave it back to him. And he said, do you realize some of this book was written under the influence of LSD? And I said, that's impossible. LSD is a delusion. It's a hallucination. Nothing good comes from it. You go crazy, blah, blah. And he said, no, it's true. And it turned out he was right. It was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey.
Yes.
All right. So that cracked me open. So I was like, okay, there's probably more to this. And so when I first started taking LSD at college, when I'm 17 and 18, and mescaline, I had these intimations of something beyond myself, that part of something bigger.
Yeah.
We talk about that as the ego dissolution, the default mode network decreasing in activity, and you aren't so I-centered anymore, and you see we're part of something much bigger. And that's why these drugs have been used for thousands of years for spiritual reasons. But that impressed me politically. I thought, okay, if you feel connected, if not just think,
right.
But if you feel the sense of connection, it's going to be harder to kill other people, to commit genocide, to dehumanize them, to be racist, to trash the environment. So I thought, in this crazy world, how can I make this better? And I had my parents, saying, look, yeah, we're refugees in our history, but America has been good to us, and we've been able to be successful in America. My dad was a doctor, and they said, but think about all the rich people on the Titanic as the Titanic is sinking. You can have all the money in the world. So I was encouraged to think about these political situations. And so when I went to my parents and I said, I want to drop out of college, I want to study LSD, I want you to pay for it.
Right.
And it has to do with making a better world, kind of producing these mystical spiritual experiences. The psychedelics are not the only way to get there, but they're one of the more reliable ways to get there. And so in the end, my parents said, okay. They said, we think you're making a big mistake, but we think you're a stubborn guy. And we think if we help you, you'll realize you're making a mistake sooner. And if we don't help you, once you realize you're making a mistake, you're not going to want to admit it, because then your parents are right. And and then my dad was great. He said, I have the vaguest idea, maybe a tiniest fraction of a percent, what you need to do. So we will support you. So anyway,
That's
it was
amazing.
political. I had terrific parents. I really, absolutely terrific parents. And I wouldn't be here without their support.
Yeah, and that's so forward thinking and smart on their part. This idea of like, well, if we don't support him, then that just can end up just making him more stubborn. It sounds like my parents.
Yeah. Well, the other part of it was that, my grandparents on one side were very poor, and they had a small bookstore. They were in the Bronx and all. And it was the classic story of, my dad was their only child, and he was groomed from the time he was 2 or 3 years old to become a doctor. Yeah. And, the Jewish doctor idea, and right. So he was happy as a doctor, but he just said, okay, I was programmed from a young age. I had no choice. It was the right thing for me, but I want to help my own children figure out what they want to do.
That's awesome. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what were so you mentioned that you read this book, you got some sense that there was kind of more to this, and then you had personal experiences. What were some of those personal experiences like? In those early experiences, did you have those kind of ego disillusion experiences that? Um,
I had intimations of that,
mhm.
which was enough. But my first sort of book that I really started reading about psychedelics was, ironically, I was reading the Whole Earth catalog that
Mm,
Stephen Brand put out, and they had a small section about a book called "Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer" by John Lilly. And John Lilly was paid for by the military in the 50s to develop what they called isolation chambers.
yes.
They were very interested in what happens when you reduce the sensory input. What does the brain do then? And he was actually paid, I think it was by the Navy, to develop these isolation chambers, which we now have rebranded flotation
Right.
tanks in a much better way. And he was paid to do LSD in those things. And he tried to chart out how his brain worked under different states of consciousness in the flotation tank. And that's what this book was about. So I read that. So friends and I started trying to do minimal sensory input environments, the
Yeah.
best of that we could create. And we took bunches of LSD in those and mescaline. And so I had intimations of something deeper, but I wasn't emotionally fluid. I got scared. It is
Hmm.
terrifying. A lot of people think the ego dissolution, they confuse it with physical death.
Right.
Your sense of who you are is dissipating, and you think I must be dying. And so people often think that they are dying during this ego dissolution. And I didn't have the ability to really cry, let out, stuff like that. I was emotionally constipated, you could say,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
intellectually overdeveloped, emotionally underdeveloped, and so it was hard. And so these experiences that I had early were um, very instructive and useful, but they weren't easy in any way. And so I had a bunch of difficult experiences where I'd freeze up and I couldn't go any further. And it would happen sooner and sooner in the trip. So I had these
Mm.
sequence of LSD trips over the period of a couple months where they just, I would freeze up earlier and earlier. And the worst example of it was um, at one point, you know how a light bulb works. It's electricity into something that resists the flow of it, and then it just heats up, and you get light.
Right.
So I had this idea that the psychological resistance that I was doing
Mm.
under the
Hmm.
influence of LSD was blocking the energies going through my brain, and that I was therefore melting my brain.
Ah.
And then I had this nasal drip, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my brain like dripping
Right.
out
Dripping
my
down your
nose.
throat.
Yeah, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is so scary. So, part of you is like, is this really happening? Part of you is like, oh my God, this is my fear is going wild. And I kept feeling like I had to overcome this. And this was after the backlash against the 60s. Psychedelics were criminalized, everything was shut down. There's the research was shut down, all over the world. Nixon is like saying Leary's the dangerous man in
Yeah.
America and stuff. And I just was feeling like I had to purify myself so I could be more of an effective advocate. And so I went to the guidance counselor at college, and he took me seriously, unbelievably.
Wow.
It was
Yeah.
1972. He didn't say, we're kicking you out of school, we're calling the police. He's like, yeah, this LSD stuff, it's worth exploring. And however unbelievably lucky I was multiple times in my life, but this guy gave me a book to read, which changed my life, and it was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research by Stan Grof.
Yes.
Now, that book wasn't published till 1975, and so my guidance counselor had a manuscript copy that he'd gotten
Wow.
from
Wow.
Stan.
Wow.
Who would predict it? He'd gotten it from Stan. So I read this book, and everything came together reading this book. And because it was science, so I trusted
Hmm.
science. I didn't trust religion. I didn't trust culture. I trusted science. But it was looking at realms of the human unconscious. It was looking at spiritual experiences, ego dissolution experiences, childhood, other memories coming to the
Yeah.
surface. It was looking at that, and that, so he kind of divided into three sort of categories. Freudian, which he would sort of basically say is, what happens in your life, these kind of dynamics. And Freud's theories, a lot of them were wrong, but
Hmm.
still, then Otto Rank, he talked about birth trauma, about
Mm-hmm.
how modern psychology has kind of overlooked the imprinting that we get as humans from going from free floating in the uterus to being born,
Yeah.
and how that's, you think you're about to die, and there are a lot of people die in childbirth, and a lot of challenging, and how those are imprints. And then he said beyond that, beyond this sort of death rebirth struggle, is this collective unconscious, the Jungian phase.
Hmm.
So this was terrific. But here he was talking about the spiritual experience that I felt had political implications, but coming at from a scientific perspective, which was great. But what most compelled me to be excited about this was that there was the reality check on all these theories was therapy. Is people getting better? How do you use this to help
Yeah.
people? And so I was just very interested in that, and that seemed to me like all of this is the key. Okay, if I can become an underground psychedelic therapist, this would be a life's mission. I can try to bring back psychedelic research. I can try to become a psychedelic therapist. I can go through my own psychedelic therapy, and it has all these political implications. So I asked my guidance counselor if he could um, connect me, give me Stan's address, so I could write Stan a letter, and he did. All right, so I'm a confused 18-year-old,
Yeah.
and Stan's MD, PhD at Hopkins, and he's doing all this LSD research, but the LSD research is shut down, and he's unbelievably, he wrote me back.
Wow.
And he said that he was doing a workshop in California that summer. He invited me to that workshop. So I hitchhiked across America. I got to go to this workshop with Stan. I did, and Joan Halifax, he was married to at the time. I did a primal therapy intensive for 3 weeks for screaming about your birth trauma. I did a month-long encounter group, and all of that didn't leave me where I wanted to be. I wasn't, quote, enlightened. And I
Sure.
had the delusion, the more drugs you do, the faster you get enlightened.
Right. Of course.
And
More is better.
more is better. It's exactly, Jason. It seemed logical at the time.
Yep.
But then I started realizing I had completely underestimated the importance of integration.
Mm.
And, it was a delusion that the more drugs you take. In fact, sometimes the more drugs you take, you run further away from enlightenment or from maturity, or however we want to call it, because you got to do the integration of the work of the things that you discovered. So anyway, that ended up into 10 years of getting in the construction business and kind of getting grounded in that way. And then 10 years later in 82, I went back to college as a freshman, and my first semester I did a workshop with Stan Groff
Wow.
at Esalen, called The Mystical Quest. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. And it was at that workshop where, my goal for the semester was to design a curriculum to make me into a psychedelic therapist, an undergraduate curriculum. And New College, you can create a lot of independent study, all of that.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah.
while I was there, this woman, Debbie Harlow, came by and said that there was a new drug called Adam, and it was a great drug for therapy. And it helped you feel love. It helped you feel connected to people, made you a better listener, all this stuff. And I was like, oh, that's great. I already feel love. I've got a great girlfriend. I'm in love. I'm a good listener. I think highly of myself.
I'm already good.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I saw a group of people sitting around in a circle doing MDMA, talking to each other. And I was like, that seems trivial. You take a bunch of LSD. Back in the olden days, a standard dose of LSD was 250 micrograms. Where it's like an existential crisis, and there's hours where you have a hard time talking. One of my favorite albums from the 60s is by David Crosby.
Oh, man.
It was a solo album, and the title of it was "If I Could Only Remember My Name."
Yes.
So that's the LSD story. I'm like, who am I? What is,
Right.
You're in a whole other world.
Yeah, just the sledgehammer gets taken to the ego, and you spin out, and you have a lot to think about.
Yeah, I highly recommend that album to people. It's phenomenal. If I Could Only Remember My Name by David Crosby. But I saw these people doing MDMA, and I was like, so what? They're talking to each other. No big deal. But I like to say that I was stupid enough to underestimate it, but smart enough to buy some.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went home to my girlfriend, and we had an amazingly profound and deep interaction. It was just shocking to me how much I had misunderstood the power of it.
Yeah.
And I thought this drug has incredible therapeutic potential. But this was during Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan and escalation of the drug war. This was 1982. And unfortunately, in some ways, the MDMA atom, as it was known in the therapeutic circles, had leaked out of these therapeutic circles and was being used now in party circles as ecstasy. So anyway, it was doomed. We knew it was doomed. And so I started getting involved politically. So that's sort of the genesis of my political work in the world.
Yeah. Well, and that's so fascinating. There's so many little perfect things that lined up for you. That's just amazing. As you tell that story, I mean, the fact that your counselor that you went to didn't just shut things down and kick you out is really incredible. I mean, especially at that time.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was a new college
Yeah.
that had been started in the 60s, experimental college, no grades, written evaluations. Now, if you go to most guidance counselors at schools, they'll kick you out, or even if you talk about marijuana,
right?
They'll, So it was just incredibly lucky. I just had a series of lucky things that have led to me to think, I'm not in a concentration camp. I've not been incinerated by a nuclear weapon. I'm not in Vietnam. I'm not in jail.
Yeah.
I should use my freedom to work on the best idea I have to help humanity as a whole, which I think is like lemmings going over a cliff, destroying the environment. We see what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now. There's, Myanmar. I mean, there's just the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of violence, the decline of democracy in many places, democracy threatened here in the United States. It's a terrifying situation. And so, but it was terrifying back then. So even now, I would say in some ways even more so, but it was my way to try to make a better world. And that's what I've been doing for now, since it was 71 that I started doing LSD. It's 72 where I decided to vote my life. That's 49 years ago. And it still makes sense. That's the good thing. And not only that, but it's making sense a little bit more to the world too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And more and more, and the point of this conversation and this mini series on this podcast is pointing out how much we've learned over the past, not even just in the past century, but even going back thousands of years, but trying to, just point out how far we've come, even in relatively a short amount of time. Now, our scientific understanding of a lot of what we deem psychedelic compounds, we still don't understand a lot, but we understand a hell of a lot more than we did as far as why these experiences take, the forms that they do and their potential therapeutic applications. It's really incredible. And this actually leads to one sort of philosophical question I wanted to ask you, which is how do you think about the word psychedelic? Like when you're thinking about chemicals and everything, what makes something a psychedelic?
Okay, Jason, I'm so glad you asked that question. So psychedelic, well, first off, when I started MAPS, which was in 1986, this is after a previous nonprofit that I started to organize the therapeutic community to fight against the criminalization of MDMA. And that was called Earth Metabolic Design Lab. It had been connected to Buckminster Fuller.
Oh, wow.
And it was for alternative energy. A friend of mine had started the branch of it in Florida, but he wasn't using it. And I said, hey, alternative energy, that counts psychedelics, mental energy. Can I use this nonprofit? So in any case, when I started MAPS, I knew I wanted to use the word psychedelic in the title.
Yeah.
And even though it had all the baggage from the 60s and counterculture and all of that, I felt that we want to reclaim it. The same way, queer has been reclaimed for you're gay or queer, So what I've done is, and I wanted to put out like a flag to everybody that was interested in psychedelics, because so many people were using psychoactive running away from it. So I felt I have to use psychedelic. Now, psychedelic in the original meaning is mind manifesting. And so the way we have interpreted psychedelic, it's not just linked to drugs. So Stan Grof has developed holotropic breath work, which is a way through hyperventilation to produce experiences that are somewhat similar to LSD and can be therapeutic. So holotropic breathwork is psychedelic.
Yep.
Ketamine is called a dissociative anesthetic. In 1/10 of the anesthetic dose, more or less, is a psychedelic dose. So under certain circumstances, ketamine is a psychedelic. MDMA, a lot of people have said, oh, it's not really like the classic psychedelics, and that's very true. The classic psychedelics dissolve the ego, dissolve the default mode network. MDMA doesn't do that. That's why we could see a bunch of people sitting in a circle talking to each other, because they still knew who they were. They could still remember their name. They could still remember the other people's names. They could still be interested in them. They could have a logical conversation. So some people have said MDMA should be properly called an intactogen, to touch within, or empathogen, something that promotes empathy. For me, at least, I think having a broader definition of psychedelic makes a lot of sense. And so that also means when you start a nonprofit, also, you have to be really careful what you say your mission is, because you need to follow your mission. So by interpreting the word psychedelic in as broad a way as possible, we can do research with breath work. We can do research with ketamine, with MDMA, with LSD. So that's my response. I think psychedelic, and because it means mind manifesting in its original definition, it does allow for this broader interpretation. And I think what we've been able to do is now psychedelic is kind of a cool word. It's not like this terrible word, the hippies who protested the war, who jumped off of buildings because they were on high on LSD. It's psychedelic has different connotations now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even people that may be sort of like the most conservative people you could imagine may still use the term psychedelic to describe, paisleys on fabric on clothes or something. Yeah, it's like these, it has really permeated the culture. And I'm really glad that that's the approach you take, because that's really how I think of it too. I always go back to that old definition, mind manifesting. What are activities, compounds, whatever, that bring things, to the forefront to manifest the mind, bring things out for you to confront, deal with, integrate, examine, whatever. And that can be so many things. Breathe work. I even lump sometimes like lucid dreaming and other things like that in there.
Totally right. And so that's a really good point, which is that we all experience non-ordinary states of consciousness during our dreams.
Yeah.
And so that, and another way to think about LSD is like a waking dream, where things come to the surface. I mean, it's different than a waking dream, but yeah, I think that normalizes it when you start reminding people of dreaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And the symbology and things that can come about representing different ideas and aspects of things going on in your psyche. I think that's really great. And this actually segues perfectly into one of the things I really wanted to make sure to confront, considering that this podcast is going to be promoted towards people that maybe don't have a lot of experience with this, which is, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you commonly run into that people often have about psychedelics?
Well, I'd say the most important misconception is that the psychedelic by itself is enough to produce good experiences, therapeutic experiences, spiritual experiences, recreational experiences, that the experiences are not in the drug. They're the drug and the context and the relationship that people have with the drug. It's that combination. So when we talk about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, it's therapy. It's MDMA-assisted therapy. It's not therapy-assisted MDMA. It's MDMA-assisted therapy. The therapy is the most important thing. The human relationship, the drug makes that more effective. So I think a lot of people think the power is in the drugs. You hear all sorts of people saying, well, these are even advocates say, oh, the mushrooms told me to do this, or the mushrooms told me to do that. And I think we all want some degree of certainty, like, oh, some expert, nature, for some people it's a guy in a white beard who's up in the clouds, God, other people it's nature or whatever. but we all want outside validation, outside certainty. But I think that's false,
Yep.
a delusion, so it's not the mushrooms is telling you this. The mushrooms is releasing
Yes.
us to look deeper into ourselves, and we are sort of telling ourselves this with the aid of this mushrooms. I mean, a lot of people are taking now synthetic psilocybin, and that's all the research.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's in the mushroom, but it's not from the anyway. I think that this misconception. The other is a lot of people have this idea of one dose miracle cure.
Ah, yeah.
That was my thought. Okay, I'm gonna take LSD. I'll be enlightened. And yeah, it didn't work the first time, but I'll just try the
Do
second
a
time or the
heroic
third
dose
time.
and you'll be good.
Yeah, so I think that's a big misconception. Then, so that's like overestimating the benefits. You could say,
Yeah.
Bunch of misconceptions. Miracle cure, or it's all in the drug. You take the drug, you have spiritual experience or therapeutic. I'd say the other side of it is overestimating the risks.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of myths about LSD causing chromosome damage, LSD making you certifiably insane after you take it, MDMA causing substantial brain damage and neurotoxicity, or holes in your brain, or MDMA draining spinal fluid. I'm like, oh my God, how do you think that works?
Right.
MDMA
Yeah.
draining
How's the
spinal
physiology
fluid.
line up for that?
Yeah, and how come MDMA is the only thing that does this?
Right, and all of the very similar chemicals that your body's already handling don't cause that?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, this is a little funny story. I know we're running out of time, but I'll just tell very briefly. So my wife and I, got married in 1993, but our first date was 1989, and I think she didn't think of it as a date. I sort of did, but so we're at lunch. First time we were in a class together at school, and so and she just wanted to talk to me about a mushroom experience she had in college. But during this conversation, she's like, we're just meeting each other stuff, but I would never want to have a relationship with you or get married to you or anything like that, because you've done so much LSD, you're going to have deformed babies. And I was like, oh my God. So our joke is, so I said, well, look, let me defend my sperm.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Let me go to battle.
This is not like deformed babies. So, but anyway, that's a myth. So there's a lot of myths about the risks of these drugs as well.
Yeah. And in trying to think the way to phrase this. So spinning off of the risk, the sort of exaggerated risk side, what are some of the legitimate risks around psychedelics that particularly great. For like recreational users or casual users that aren't doing it in any sort of controlled context? What are some of the actual legitimate risks that through all of the research that MAPS and other groups have done has kind of come to light?
All right. Well, for those people that have not seen my TED Talk, and if you haven't, I encourage you to see it, but I spoke about a woman that I worked with in 1984 who had PTSD. And that was the first time that I ever worked with MDMA with somebody who had PTSD, and I saw her get better. Mm-hmm. And now, Marcela, now she's one of our top therapists. She later became a therapist, and she trains other therapists. But the reason that I got in touch with her, and this relates to your question about risks, is that a friend of mine asked me for some MDMA. So I sold him some MDMA. This is back before it was illegal, and in 1984. And he did it with his girlfriend, Marcela, who I did not know, never met her. And under the influence of MDMA, doing it together with this friend of mine, she remembered prior situation where she was raped and almost killed. And that came to the surface in a way. She'd been in mental institutions before. She'd been under treatment for that. It had been a very terrible situation, but she thought she was now back in some kind of a good balance. So, and she takes MDMA in a romantic situation with somebody that she cares about. But these memories came to the surface, and she wasn't prepared to deal with it. And she felt that she was in danger again of self-harm, of suicide. So she checked herself into a mental institution in order not to hurt herself.
Yeah.
And they gave her some drugs that are same as kind of drugs she'd gotten before, and she knew they weren't going to help her. And she got out of the mental institution, and she was worse than before because she thought, the traditional psychiatry has nothing for me. So that's why my friend asked if I would work with her, and that led to this. But okay, so one of the risks is difficult emotions coming to the surface that you're not prepared for. So another example, this is like 15 years ago, but two women contacted us in the same week with different stories. One of them said they both had similar stories. Both had taken MDMA at a rave.
Yeah.
One said, I went to a rave with my friends, and we were all out just to have fun. And I remembered prior sexual abuse, and my friends didn't want to talk about it. I knew that they were just out to have fun. So I just said, I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm going to stuff my feelings down. And, she said, now it's months ago and I still feel worse. Not dealing with stuff is a big problem. This other woman said, I went to a rave. I took MDMA. I was with some friends. I remembered prior sexual abuse. A girlfriend and I, we went off into the corner. We talked about it. We worked through it. An hour later, I felt much better. I went back to the party. I danced. I had a great time. Now I feel a lot better. And I think MDMA could be great for PTSD. It's from sexual abuse. So I'd say one of the biggest risks is psychologically.
Yeah.
Now, I would say that the classic psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, ayahuasca, ibogaine, they're riskier psychologically than MDMA because MDMA doesn't dissolve the ego. It reduces fear, even though things do emerge in these situations where I've described. There are risks, but I think so. The first thing is you have to be prepared for the range of emotions when you take it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't just say, I want this slice of emotions, because then you're suppressing things that can make you worse. So that's the psychological risk story. With the classic psychedelics, as I said before, you can feel like you're dying. You can feel like you're going crazy. You need support. And people have done horrible things, killed themselves or killed others, or while they're under the influence of psychedelics in these fearful states. Super, super rare. But physiologically, the classic psychedelics are safer than MDMA. They don't hurt your brain. You can't overdose on them. They're not going to cause you, But MDMA increases blood pressure. We have stories about people taking MDMA and dancing all night at raves and getting hyperthermia, overheating, and then dying. Then we have on the other side, that story's been out, and so people think I got to drink fluids to cool down, and then people drink too much water. They dilute their blood. They die from what's called hyponatremia.
Oh man!
So there's a remote possibility people that are epileptic, that psychedelics, particularly more of the classic psychedelics, can trigger a seizure. So I'd say that there are risks. I would encourage people, if they're interested in the risks of MDMA, one of the things that we've had to do in order to develop it as a medicine is we've had to survey the entire world scientific literature on MDMA and summarize it in what's called an investigator's brochure. So that's posted for free on our website. So if you go to the maps.org and you go under research and you go down to MDMA, at the bottom of that page, it says investigator's brochure. So that's a summary of all the world's literature, and a lot of it is on risks. So that's, I'd say, the best place to get a real survey of the risks of MDMA. To understand the risks of LSD or psilocybin, again, I think it's more psychological than physiological.
Yeah.
But there's books that you could read about those. We did not make a investigator's brochure about LSD or psilocybin.
Yeah, and another thing I'll add to that too is MAPS has just a really great library of scientific literature for people to check out that's nicely organized. I've referenced it so many times throughout my life.
Great, Jason.
Yes, yeah, it's excellent. In general, just the resources, and I mentioned offline that I've been following MAPS since I was like 14 years old, primarily because I come from a family, my dad was mentally ill, and I had an early experience with friends of mine where I was their babysitter the first time they did psychedelic mushrooms. And the things they were talking about, I was like, this isn't crazy. Like, what is going on? And I was trying to wrap my head around psychedelics because I was like, it's not as, bizarre as I thought it was. Hallucinations are not what I thought they were, all of this sort of stuff. And so early on thinking like, what's going on. I learned about maps, studied all these things, learned about the therapeutic potential. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like my dad is a perfect candidate for, trying to get help from these substances. And that's become a lifelong passion of mine. And I mentioned before we started that finally he's started experimenting with ketamine therapy, which has been very beneficial for like really severe depression that he deals with related to PTSD. And now we live in a state where medical use of psilocybin has just been approved. So we're interested in kind of exploring that. And so seeing the website of MAPS evolve over all of this
Yeah.
time has been fascinating. It's such a great resource. And all of this, I know we've got just 3 minutes here, but to wrap everything. Okay. Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And this still, it segues nicely, which is, what are you excited about for the future of MAPS? Like I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, you just finished this phase 3 trial with MDMA. And I know MDMA gets a lot of the spotlight because that's sort of on the forefront of drug approval and everything. It's really farther along. But now psilocybin, is obviously getting a lot of talk, especially as states are starting to change laws. And now that Oregon has done what they did, a lot of other states are looking to that and thinking, maybe we want to, do that too and have medical psilocybin use. So what's kind of on the horizon for both yourself and MAPS?
Well, let me mention what's happening for us in Oregon.
Yeah.
So, it's very important that these decrim legalization type scenarios work out well. So in Oregon, we're trying to, we have psychedelic harm reduction,
Yes.
which the Zendo project is training people to do peer support for other people that are having difficult psychedelic trips, or we do train therapists as well. So we're trying to do more public education in Oregon, which is why I'm glad to be talking with you now. We're also from a compassionate use, the FDA, while we're doing phase 3, the FDA has a program called expanded access, which means that people can get access to drugs before they're approved while they're still being researched. But because they're not approved yet, people have to take the risk that these are drugs
Right.
that, they're not fully approved, but also people have to pay for the treatment themselves because there's no control group.
Yep.
So that the data is not useful for us to make it into a medicine. So we have one expanded access site in Portland, Oregon, that's going to open up.
Oh, great.
And
Wow.
then also what we've done so far. So we just published in Nature Medicine this paper that was about our first of 2 phase 3 studies. And the paper was, the study was tremendously successful. But, and I think we're on a track for the first half of 2023 to get MDMA approved by the FDA as a prescription medicine. We still have a lot of work to go.
Yeah.
We can't say that, but it's all individual therapy, and we have 2 therapists for one person. Usually a male-female team. The lead person needs to be licensed to do a therapist. The second person could be a student, an intern, something like that to keep the cost down. But it's all individual therapy. So we've just gotten a grant that's for a group therapy study that will take place at the Portland, Oregon VA. And that's going to be really exciting. It's going to be 3 cohorts of 6 veterans. There'll be 4 therapists for 6 veterans, and we'll explore what can be done in a group therapy setting. I personally don't think it's going to be as successful as individual therapy.
Yeah.
But it still was likely to be quite successful. And it could be the substantial fraction of the cost of individual therapy. So, so that's what I'm excited about. And it does happen to be taking place in Oregon. The other things that I'm really excited about are that we want to globalize what we're doing. We're trying to do big fundraise now to go to Europe. I would encourage if people want to become MAPS, we're looking to expand our monthly donors, special program for that. So just encourage people if they want to support this. We have raised over 110 million in our 35 years. But in the last 2 years, the for-profit companies with psychedelics have raised over $1 billion.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are against drug policy reform, or they're against what's happening in Oregon. They see it as a threat, or they are trying to patent everything and block other people to do it. So we would like to continue in a nonprofit context without these kind of financial pressures. So I'm excited. We're going to try to do a big fundraise for globalizing. So we want to go where the
Excellent.
pain
Yeah.
the pain is, not where the money is. Although we do want to go to Europe and the U.S. Of course, that's where the main money is for pharmaceutical companies, and Japan. But we've been in touch with people from Palestine. There was actually a group that we wanted to work with, Center for Center for Victims of Torture is what it's called.
Hmm.
So we're trying to train Palestinian therapists as well. Now, of course, with the war, the increase in PTSD is going to be terrible.
I know.
We've
Yeah.
we've got South Africa, Rwanda, Somaliland, Bosnia, Armenia. We're trying all sorts of different places to do research. But um, what we're starting tonight is a new approach to training therapists. So it's going to be 300 therapists from around the world, 100 hours virtually. And so tonight is when that new approach starts. So we want to train
Wow.
thousands and thousands of therapists. So I'm very excited about the expansion of our therapist training program. And we're also starting to plan ahead to the idea of psychedelic clinics and how is that going to go. So we already have hundreds in America of ketamine clinics
Yeah.
because ketamine is now legal for treatment of depression. But what we're seeing more and more, well, first off, it's a disaster, not disaster, it's a suboptimal way where ketamine was approved without therapy,
Yeah.
as if,
Yeah. Yep.
here, take this drug and, we don't.
That's been one of my biggest complaints about what my dad has gone through is that it's treatment, but there's, they suggest follow up with therapy, but it's not married into the program.
I think you're so right. I mean, they think that they can make more money just giving ketamine to more people. The other part is that ketamine experiences fade pretty quickly.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
people need a lot of repeat sessions. So that's good for the company selling you the ketamine, but it's not the best for the patients. And when you combine ketamine with therapy, you get better outcomes. And so what we're seeing, and you need less ketamine.
Yeah.
But not a lot of the places are doing that. So what we do see, though, is that those people that do work with ketamine that are interested in providing it with therapy, they want to be cross-trained. And they want to learn how to give MDMA. They want to learn how to give psilocybin. They want to learn how to give ketamine, whereas each drug got its unique best use and niche. And that'll, of course, vary with each individual patient. And so what we're trying to look forward to is expanding our training program to have a module on ketamine, a module on psilocybin. Right now, it's just focused on MDMA. And to be thinking about these future ketamine or psychedelic clinics, because the therapists want to be psychedelic therapists. They don't want to be, I'm an MDMA therapist, I'm an LSD therapist, I'm a psilocybin therapist, I'm a ketamine therapist. They want to be cross-trained in all these modalities. So that's happening. I'm also very excited about the work with the Veterans Administration. We're about to start inside the Bronx VA, inside the Loma Linda VA. The Portland, Oregon is maybe 6 months away because we still have to go through FDA and get all the regulatory approvals. But it was since 1990 that I've been trying to get the VA to do MDMA research, offering them money. And they would, the therapists and patients in touch with, the therapists and psychiatrists in touch with the patients want new things. They know there's new treatments that they need. Doesn't work for everybody what they've got. But the political people have squashed it. Now that's changed.
Yeah.
So now after 31 years of effort, we're about to see MDMA going into the VA settings. That's super exciting.
Wow.
We've treated over 40 veterans. None of them have been referred by the VA, but we haven't treated any active duty soldiers. So we're trying to do that. That would be a big breakthrough. So I'm excited about that. The idea here is that the treatment should be delivered the closer to the trauma.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Now a lot of people are resilient and recover, but for people that have gotten PTSD, which is chronic, which is over 6 months, why wait? The people in our phase 3 study had PTSD for an average of 14 years, but 1/3 of them have had PTSD for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And we had one person that was a Vietnam vet that was able to get better after almost 50 years of PTSD.
That's exactly, thinking about my dad, that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited because he's an example like that of 45, 50 years.
Yeah, and your brain gets into these patterns and it gets very hard to get out of.
Those deep ruts.
Yeah, and psychedelics break those patterns, and they also produce neuroplasticity. where you can actually be remolding, rewiring your brain and different routing circuits for different things. You change. It's called, for memories, for traumatic memories, called fear extinction and memory
Yeah.
reconsolidation. So I think there's just enormous potential here um, for so many people, and so I'm just excited to sort of move to that next step. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We're still 2 years from FDA
Of
approval.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely. But it's a
yeah,
incredible. I mean, this has been such a great lesson in persistence.
yeah,
To just keep pushing forward, keep taking those next steps. The VA thing that's taken 30 years
yeah.
to come around, but just continuing to chip away bit by bit, to get to that next step. It's amazing, and the targets, the global focus. I mean, I'm really excited because my wife is a mental health therapist. This is stuff we talk about quite a bit, but I certainly see psychedelics used in the proper therapeutic context as being a significant revolution in psychiatric medicine. And it's not new. I mean, in the 50s, there were manuals written about, how do we integrate, some of these compounds into therapeutic sessions. And so seeing you target some of the populations of trauma survivors that really need the most help, that are going through unspeakable experiences, and having to integrate that and figure out how to move forward in their lives. I can only imagine it's going to be just immensely impactful, and I have a lot of respect for that. So I'm really happy to hear that. And yeah, in general, Rick, thanks so much for taking the time today to speak with me on all this. And I mean, I could speak for hours about all this. There's so many questions and things that I want to tease out, but I appreciate you being willing to carve out this time
Yeah.
and go into all of this. And I hope that everyone listening, that this has been, informative, that, provides some insight into kind of where this has kind of come from, and kind of where it seems to be going. It's extremely exciting.
Wow. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, we're at a cultural turning point for sure. And I don't think if we do it wisely, which we are trying our best, I don't think there's going to be a backlash like there was in the 60s.
I
I
agree.
think we will successfully integrate it. I think the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative's got a real good chance of working out well, and the world needs it. So
Yep.
thank
More
you
than more
for
than ever.
more than ever. So thank you, yeah, for helping me with the public education part of it.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. Well, yeah, thanks so much, everyone tuning in. Thanks so much for listening. And if you want to learn more about Isn't Life Curious, just find us at isn'tlifecurious.com. If you want to learn more about MAPS, really easy, just go to maps.org and you'll find them there, and all of the resources that we've mentioned. So thanks so much, everyone, and stay curious and take it easy. Bye-bye.